Trump and his tweets, do we still call them that, are back, and they had the markets hanging on his every word this week. I'll tell you about how he jerked us around and how his tariff threats could potentially impact the economy, American households, and mortgage interest rates. We got a really nice, substantial rally in mortgage bonds on Monday following Scott Bessent's appointment to Treasury Secretary. I guess I spoke a little bit too soon on Friday about Warsh. Whoops. Back to Bessent, though. Markets and mortgage bonds really liked this move because he has said that he thinks Trump's tariff plans are just threats. They're a negotiating tool, if you will. They wouldn't actually materialize. But the problem with naming a threat, if you make your plans public and then say they aren't your actual plans, they were just a threat to create the desired effect, you wouldn't actually do it, then you kind of take away the power of the threat itself, don't you? So Trump immediately flew into action on Monday and made a post on Truth Social that day one, these tariffs against Mexico and Canada are going into effect. Make no mistake. All products coming into the U.S. from these countries will be subject to a 25% tariff as of January 20th. And with that, bonds gave back all their gains. Everyone will be talking about this at Thanksgiving, so let's get our facts straight. Disclaimer here, though. I know Trump speaks in hyperbole, and many take solace in the fact that he will not do the things he says he's going to do. He has a greater plan for us. For example, since we're talking about tariffs, it's been argued that his play with Mexico is, I will wreck your economy, and potentially ours, until you get the border situation under control. I'm not privy to the information inside his head and heart, so for the purpose of this blog, we will accept what he says he's going to do as what he wants to do. That way, we can analyze the potential impact. Mexico. There's a new boss in town there. The former Mexican president who was in office during Trump's first term was much friendlier with him than our girl Claudia. Claudia promptly responded to Trump's social media post by stating she's not all that stoked about the things crossing the border into her country. She said that guns crossing the border into Mexico, 70% of the illegal weapons seized from criminals there come from the U.S. She pointed out that while the U.S. imports $475 billion in goods from Mexico, it also exports $323 billion into Mexico. So she has some ideas for retaliation. Did you know that last year Mexico overtook China as the top exporter of goods to the U.S.? I'll tell you why in just a bit. I think an important export to analyze from Mexico specifically is car parts. Mexico's main exports to the U.S. are to General Motors, Stellantis, and Ford. Taxing those exports increases car prices. We also have to consider how much produce comes from Mexico because this will directly impact our grocery costs. $44.1 billion of produce came in 2022. Now let's talk about Canada. You may be aware how much of the supplies required to build homes come from Canada. This immediately caught my attention because the last thing we need is for the supplies, the cost of building a home, to increase when we are in the midst of such a severe housing shortage. The media talks a lot about energy costs. We import 4 billion barrels of oil from Canada a day. It would take years of investment on our side to be able to source a different kind of oil from here, at least at that scale. So this tariff specifically would increase the cost of gas between 25 and 75 cents per gallon. Probably why the Canadian Prime Minister responded to Trump on Tuesday by basically just saying, bet, with a smirk on his face. What's interesting is that in Trump's first term, he negotiated the United States-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. And he himself created a rule that tariffs could not be slapped on goods coming in from Mexico and Canada. So he's going to have to get around his own work there in order to impose his new plan. Currently, all these goods are coming across these two borders, tax-free, and everything is already expensive. So imagine what a 25% tariff would do to inflation. Then there's you and me. And mind you, I am aware there's an elephant in the room here, China, but I don't have time to get into that right now. It would probably need its own whole blog post. I will say, President Biden kept almost all of the tariffs that Trump imposed on China in place. He actually added more. And we saw the impact. The US consumer pays more now for imports from China. We saw exactly who paid for it, which is why I want to talk about how the proposed tariffs would impact ordinary people. As we know, this was an election where people mainly voted based on the economy. So, what happens historically with tariffs? They're not something that other countries end up paying for. It's a cost that gets transferred to the consumer. So how does this play out now? Groceries, gas, alcohol, cars get more expensive. But again, only if Trump does what he says he's going to do. He was elected by many who voted for him, banking on him doing the exact opposite. There's hope that his tough stance with Mexico improves our own crime rates even further. I say even further because the FBI's data shows that violent crime in the US over the past 2 years has declined in a very major way. Strangely, 70% of Americans believe that crime is rising, despite the fact that it is at a 50-year low. When we look at homicide, rape, aggravated assault, robbery, 50-year low. Mass shootings, that's a different story. I digress. Back on track, interest rates. Tariff talk was the main driver of bonds this week, but we should watch other policies as well. Trump's proposed policies could lead to higher interest rates depending on how they affect inflation, the mortal enemy of mortgage bonds, and economic growth, which will dictate Fed policy. I'm putting together a complete interest rate forecast for 2025, and I'm going to share it with you guys in an event I'm planning, Smarter Hour, on December 18th. And if you enjoy these weekly vlogs from somewhere outside of Reno, we are working on putting together a virtual option for you guys to join us as well. So stay tuned and have a happy Thanksgiving.